Neon Abyss is a 2D roguelite shoot-'em-up that has players descending ever deeper into a dynamically generated dungeon. And for those of you uninitiated in the genre, you essentially have a single life to get as far as you can, and upon death, you begin all over again. The gameplay loop is incredibly simple, yet effective. Neon Abyss itself is a club which serves as a hub world, and from there you can adjust the game's difficulty, purchase upgrades from the upgrade trees, bust a move on the dance floor, switch characters, and eventually jump into the abyss. Dungeons themselves are composed of several floors in which you must defeat a boss to move on to the next floor, and they end when you defeat the manager, which is essentially the final boss for each main chapter, and then you repeat that all over again. This simple loop belies the huge depth of the game, but also adds to its incredible addictiveness. Dungeons are where you'll spend most of your time in Neon Abyss, and every floor is fraught with danger from enemies to traps, and most attempts will end in death, but therein lies the beauty of the game. As you learn enemy attack patterns, build up your arsenal, and learn to spot dangers as soon as you enter a room, you'll go farther. And every death is a lesson, and you will keep learning until you finally reach and defeat a manager. Adding to replayability is that every descent is different because of the game's randomly generated dungeons. Of course, randomly generated dungeons and challenging gameplay are pretty much par for the course in any game of the genre. So what does Neon Abyss do differently? Well, for starters, you have a say in what types of rooms can appear in the dungeons. Each defeated boss drops a golden gem which can then be used at the bar to purchase upgrades via several upgrade trees. And while you can purchase new gear that will appear in the dungeon later on, you can also purchase entirely new rules which add to your experience. So for example, you can spend gems to purchase a room in which you'll be challenged to play a song on a giant piano floor a la Guitar Hero. You could also purchase a room that offers a choice of two different routes, one with plenty of treasure chests and the other with nothing. Now these new rooms may not appear on every floor, but you will encounter them at least a few times per life, and the rewards for completing their challenges successfully will greatly aid you in your mission. Almost all of the dungeon floors are aesthetically similar, but the sheer variety of layouts and traps more than make up for that. Each floor varies in size as well, with some containing only a few rooms and others being massive sprawls with special rooms dotted around them. It's also worth mentioning that most, if not all floors, have hidden rooms that can be accessed by blowing up specific walls. You begin each drop into the dungeon with nothing but a basic weapon to defeat enemies with. But through exploration, and more than a little luck, you'll go from humble beginnings to being almost godlike in power and survivability. Weapons and items are incredibly varied. Neon Abyss's official description mentions that there are over 400 items in the game, and that doesn't seem like a stretch at all. Every time I descended into the dungeon, I came across new items that boosted my abilities. These perks range from simple things such as increasing weapon damage, all the way to more impressive perks such as wings that let you fly around infinitely. What's even more incredible is that all item abilities stack. Now, it doesn't matter how many items you already have or how many times you picked up an item that passively increases weapon damage or rate of fire. So you can have an item that gives you shields when you use a key, and an item that gives you keys when you hatch an egg. You can find an item that shrinks you and an item that lets you fly. The point is that the possibilities are almost endless, and finding new items is always a blast. Guns are similarly varied. From plain old starting weapons to rocket launchers, death rays to a cat that shoots fish skeletons, weapons are unique and there's something for every playstyle. Even better, some weapons have perks that can be activated using your reserve of crystals. So for example, one weapon's active effect can make you invincible for a very short time. Another weapon can grant you the power of flight while you're in a room. But a word of warning, all but one character can only carry one weapon at a time. So you'll definitely need to weigh the pros and cons of each weapon before swapping. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with carrying only one weapon at a time, but that does tie into one of my main gripes with Neon Abyss. Unless you pick up a specific item, or play with a specific character, you can't see a description of the items and weapons until you pick them up. Now, as a general rule, you should pick up any items you find on the ground because there are always benefits and the passive effects stack. But when you find a store, and you're debating on which item to spend your hard-earned coins on, it can be a little disappointing to spend 50 coins on a weapon that feels inferior to what you had. Adding to my issues is the fact that grenades and keys aren't always readily available, and lacking either of those can cut you off from challenges and new gear. Now, this isn't necessarily the game's fault, since a lot of what you'll encounter is based on luck, but it's still disheartening to pass by doors and chests because you're saving your last key for an item room, or keeping that last grenade to unlock a stone chest. On the flip side, there are items that increase your chances of finding keys or grenades, but once again, it's all down to luck as well. Beyond items and weapons, the game also adds an interesting pet mechanic. So as you explore the various rooms of a dungeon, you'll inevitably find eggs, and after defeating a number of enemies, that egg will hatch and you'll have a new best friend following you around. And pets aren't just a gimmick, they serve a real purpose. Some of them simply exist to shoot bullets at enemies, while others will circle around you and provide protection from incoming projectiles. Some pets serve more passive but equally important roles, such as going out of their way to collect coins, hearts, and shields for you. If you can keep your pets alive, they'll continuously help you by adding to your firepower, or grabbing items for you, and even continue evolving. If you can't, well, then at least they'll go out in a blaze of glory that fits their role. While your skill is very important and it will be a major factor in determining whether you survive or not, luck is also a very important element. And as with many games in the genre, every new descent into the dungeon is a roll of the dice. You're just as likely to get incredibly powerful items and weapons as you are to get less useful ones. You begin the game with access to 2 characters, but you'll be able to unlock new ones after several dives into the dungeon. Now these different characters aren't just for show, they all bring different skills and items to the experience. So for example, there is a robot called R6, and R6 only has shields instead of hearts, but he can also see the item descriptions without needing to pick them up. James is a hitman who can carry 2 weapons, but only has 2 hearts at the start. And my personal favorite is Matt, a stuntman who has the ability to roll out of danger, and that's incredibly useful. Enemies themselves are varied and each have their own methods of attacking. It is absolutely imperative that you quickly learn their patterns in order to avoid damage and take advantage of openings to attack. So for example, some enemies are covered in metal plating and are nearly invulnerable until they drop their armor to attack. And when rooms contain a mix of different enemy types, you'll be jumping, dodging, and shooting as you adjust your strategy on the fly to win that battle. At the end of every floor, you'll need to face a boss before moving on. Now in general, bosses are enjoyable battles that'll test your skills. There are a decent amount of different bosses, and most have various incarnations that add to the difficulty, but beyond regular bosses, the main baddies are the managers, and they generally pose a serious threat. Of course, once you do defeat a manager, it will return as a regular boss in the lineup while still maintaining the initial challenge. Now as you fight bosses, things can get a little hectic with a lot happening on screen. It hasn't happened to me very often, but I have encountered massive frame rate issues during certain fights. The frame rate quickly gets back to normal, but for that second or so, it's like watching a slideshow, and that can spell death in a game like this. Again, it isn't too common and it isn't tied to any particular boss, but it has happened. And this review of Neon Abyss is based off of hours played on the Nintendo Switch, and the issue has occurred both in docked and handheld mode. Neon Abyss is a fun and addicting game. It's probably one of the best games of its genre, right up there with The Binding of Isaac, Dead Cells, and Enter the Gungeon. It is packed with content, and there is so much to do, to see, and to collect that the game never seems to get old. Even when you die, cut down in your prime by a stray projectile, and you lose your hard-earned equipment in progress, you'll want to jump right back in. Neon Abyss is the kind of game where you tell yourself, one last try, and end up playing for hours more.